Hello everybody, welcome to a new video. Today I would like to show you 9 books that changed my life forever. That may be a big word, but for all of them it is true. They did have a profound impact on some aspects of my life in some sense. So this is the little stack here. I will show you them in order. I kind of grouped them into different categories. So we have childhood books. We have books that kind of just like impacted how I view the world. We got books that impacted my reading. And then we got books where I feel like they impacted me directly as a person. So those might be considered the ones that had the biggest effect on me. So, let's start with this. Die 13,5 Leben des Captain Blaubeer. I think the English title is The 13.5 Lives of Bluebear by Walter Moers, which if you are German and you're about the same age as me, then you probably heard of this book. It features illustrations by the writer himself, and it's just the craziest high fantasy that I've ever seen. I mean, I don't really read high fantasy, but this is one of the most creative books that I've ever read to this day. It's he basically invents the genre of fantasy. Oh, there's a letter in there. Oh, I tried to. Well, that's another thing I may get into later. He doesn't follow any of the standard fantasy tropes that are so boring to me, like the kind of like Tolkien fantasy with like dwarves and dragons and elves and medieval shit and that. No, Walter Moers doesn't do any of that shit. He makes up his own continent that you can see here, where everything is set. And this drawing specifically inspired me for years. As you may or may not know, I am also an artist. And when I was a teenager, I couldn't stop drawing maps and making up my own fictional worlds and continents, like world building kind of. Usually they just ended in the map drawing, but yeah, so even this map just had like a super important impact on me. And basically we follow this character Bluebear, who is just a bear that's blue, and also he can talk, through this world. Basically he explores it. He travels to all kinds of different places, you know, and every chapter in the book is represents one life, and there's so much here. It's you meet so many like crazy characters, so many crazy sceneries. One life is set entirely inside of a tornado. For example, one life is set inside of the head of a giant, like in his brain, and it's it's for me probably, I don't know if it's my favorite books necessarily, but definitely a huge milestone in my life as a reader. I read most of his other books. He wrote. I have my whole shelf there that you can see in my book tour video. I probably have like a good 10 of them. He wrote a couple new ones, but recently for me he kind of like fell off. Like his recent books feel more like a cash grab. Like he just needs to keep writing books to get paid. That's kind of what they feel like. They're missing that kind of passion, that kind of heart that this one has. The other ones are also similarly impactful on me, but this was the first one. And also, this is not, I wouldn't consider this to be a children's book or a middle grade book. I think this is something that readers of like literally any age can enjoy, like from small children to elderly people. He wrote a different book that is very, very bloody and gory and probably shouldn't be read by little kids. I did read it as a little kid, so look what happened to me. But yeah, Walter Moers, big favorite of mine. Then the next book is a series of books that I do not have here. It's stacked somewhere in a moving box in my mom's basement, I think. And it's a series called Skulduggery Pleasant by Derek Landy that I also mentioned here before. And it's a series of, well, when I read it, it was 10 books. I checked on it a couple days ago. Apparently this guy wrote like 7 new books or something, which made me think of reading them all again and buying all the ones that I'm missing and like completely indulging myself in that world right now. But reading 17 books is a big commitment, and also I'm afraid that I wouldn't enjoy them as much as I did when I was a child. So basically, you have this living skeleton, this guy who died and in some mysterious way came back to life as a skeleton, and he works as a detective, like as a private investigator. And also, he knows magic. So it sounds so stupid when you describe it. There's a lot of things going on there. And he's not actually the main character. The main character is a girl called Valkyrie Kane. And Derek Landy wrote usually like a book a year. And the character kept aging. And they were kind of aging in real time together with me, because I think I read the first book when I must have been like 11 years old, I think. And then I read, like every year there was a new one until I was 21, I think. And yeah, then he ended the series, but apparently he went back to it because he wrote like a ton of new books. And yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the attractive things about fantasy. When you have a series that you can really draw out those characters and make them super complex and make them change. Like, I remember that character Tanny Flow in that book, that one of the most heartbreaking character arcs that I probably read to this day, even though this was a middle grade fantasy book. And yeah, this was kind of my, everybody needs like a fantasy series that they grow up on, kind of, and I was right in that age group. I'm kind of like right between millennial and Gen Z, and I feel like millennials had more like Harry Potter growing up, Gen Z had the Hunger Games, and I got Skulduggery Pleasant, which I don't know, I never hear this book mentioned, so I don't know how famous this is, but if he wrote 17 of them, then he must have been kind of successful with it. So I remember, I think every time a new book came out, almost every time I read all of the books again. So for the 10th book, I read all 9 books again in preparation to read the 10th book. So, man, I should go visit my mom and get some of those books, I think, because now by talking about it, I kind of want to read them again. Whew, well, okay. Let's by the way, this might be a long video because I think I'm gonna talk to this extent about probably every book that I'm gonna mention. So next up we got All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque. I already talked about this book in my 8 German books that you should read video, but I'll just talk about it again. I read this book for the first time when I was in 10th grade, I think, so that's like 16 years old. And even then, it really like made something click in my head, because I think that everybody should read this book. This book is gonna turn you into a pacifist, and there might be different books or better books even that deal also with this topic, but it just gives a first-hand account of a soldier fighting World War One, which was, through the soldier's perspective, this was like way more brutal and bloodier than the Second World War, because of, you know, the mustard gas that they had and the machine gun, and it was just terrible. So many people got maimed, so many people died in like brutal, horrible ways, and this book kind of, you know, it doesn't judge, doesn't lose itself in like politics or politic ramble. It just kind of gives like a personalized experience, which is not entirely autobiographical, but I guess about half of this book is a first-hand account of this dude. And yeah, it's very tragic, and it really makes you think, and it really kind of makes you question war and that whole thing. And yeah, to this day, I think this book really changed or impacted my political views and my morals and a lot of things. So thank you very much, Erich Maria Remarque. Okay, this book. I usually say that this is my favorite book of all time, which I keep questioning, but I still think I can confidently say that this is my favorite book that I've ever read, which of course is Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. When I read this, I already read most of the major works by Hesse. I still haven't read all of them, but I had a pretty good understanding of his writing style, and this really blew me away. This is the first book that ever made me like cry actual tears, you know? This already deserves a spot on this list for that. Hesse's characters usually are quite young, in the like storm and struggle phase. They want to go out into the world, they're like motivated and full of life, and there's always a tragic element to all of his protagonists, and this book really dives into that tragic element. And his character is not young, he's old, he's bitter. I already said all of this also in my 8 German books that you should read video. But yeah, anyway, like the way he wrote about the mental health and stuff, he was, by the way, he was one of the first, or maybe even the first German author who like openly wrote and talked about mental health. Like he himself suffered from depression, which he was quite open about, and he really kind of, in a sense, paved the way for that, at least in like German literature of that time. And some, you know, his thoughts on like some very, very dark topics like suicide and depression and substance abuse, they're all in here, and it really resonated with me, you know? And that's why this is my favorite book. This copy is a bit beat up. I would like to at some point get like a really nice copy of this, but that's for the future. Okay. Next up, I have 3 books that very much changed the way I view books or read books. I always wanted to mention this book on this channel because I've never seen this anywhere else on BookTube, and for the last years, every time I checked, it was out of print. It was even like pretty hard to get a hold of it. Funny story about this book. In my old apartment, one time I went on the attic and I saw like another copy in this very edition there, and I don't know who put it there. It was one of the most confusing experiences ever. And then I checked in my room and it wasn't mine, like it was a different one, which is weird for a book that is so uncommon, you know. But anyway, that's something that happens. And The People of Paper by Salvador Plascencia. Mexican author. This kind of introduced me to magical realism and to experimental literature, and completely changed my view of what a book can or cannot do. Always gives you columns. Saturn is kind of the author writing as a character himself. The book it doesn't read that confusing, but it's a bit confusing to explain. So basically, we have these people made of paper. They bleed ink. They don't have blood, and they are kind of aware of the author writing about them, and they don't want to be written about, and that's why they try to censor themselves, which they kind of, let me show you, it's more, this is kind of what that looks like. They try to stop the author from writing about them, and the author is like just a pathetic loser. He portrays himself heavily as that, so I don't feel bad calling him that. And it's a really weird book, and I really heavily want to recommend this because I feel like a lot of people on BookTube and on BookTok could really enjoy this if it was more commonly known. So if you can get your hands on one of these, then you should definitely read it. Probably my favorite experimental book that I've ever read. Next up is probably the most famous book on this list, or maybe the next one is. Anyway, Just Kids by Patti Smith. I got this as a gift bunch of years ago, maybe like 4 years ago, and I just had it lying around for ages, and I was like, I've never like really was interested in Patti Smith. I only knew about her music, and I was like, well, I know I heard her name before, but I didn't really feel interested in reading an autobiography. And then I read it, and I completely changed my mind because this was so fascinating. And the impact it had on me was that it kind of opened up that whole genre of biographies and memoirs and that kind of thing, which I still think is very much underrated. Since I read this book, I read a whole bunch of biographies of all kinds of different people, and I love them. This year I haven't read that many, but I can just advise anyone, if there's a person that interests you, then just see if someone wrote a biography about them or if they wrote one themselves, and then just pick it up and read it. It doesn't really, I don't feel like it really has to do with like building a cult around that person and idolizing them. Of course, in some way it could have, but I find it very interesting to put books in an historical context, and through biographies you really kind of get a way deeper understanding of history and of that person's art, you know, or be it music or literature or whatever it may be. It really kind of makes you understand things on a deeper level to read biographies. So that's it. And we got this fucking fever dream of a book, Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, who became, with this little tiny thing, instantly became one of my all-time favorite writers. This book is so many things at once. It's a play, which is kind of, I guess that would be like the immediate impact it had on me, that it kind of opened up that genre. I used to be very vocal and stern about not reading plays because I always said the purpose of them is to see them being performed, so why would I read them? That kind of defeats the whole purpose of them. But for most of the plays that have been written, no one performs them, at least not in like the way they would be accurate. Just really the super famous ones make it, you know, and that's why that's not very accessible. And yeah, it's I don't know. it really made me. It's just a different genre of literature to me, and he did win a literature Nobel Prize, so that kind of confirms that the play is literature, doesn't it? And the themes here are so like simple and almost like funny and humorous and almost like a vulgar way, but also so deeply philosophical and existential at the same time. And that is kind of the appeal of the whole body of work of Beckett for me, that it is so ambivalent and has so many, just has so much to it, you know? That's it. Let's get into the heavy stuff, shall we? These books changed how I behave, how I think, how I act, and how I feel about myself. So I would say these are the books that impacted my life the most out of all of these. The first one being The Road Less Traveled by Peck, which I still haven't taken the time to read more of his work, but he wrote sequels to this book. I also would like to read it in German, so maybe because I don't think I understood everything fully. The most immediate lesson that I got out of this book, by the way, this kind of dabbles like between psychology and self-help and spiritual guidebook, I guess. That's what I like about Peck. Like he writes about spirituality from a psychologist's perspective, so it's very much rooted in reality, and it's very much applicable to anyone without needing to do any like crazy meditations or stuff like that, you know. And the lesson from this book that I learned is accountability, which I don't want to throw shade on anyone, but I think my generation is in large part missing that. Just taking accountability for your own life and your own actions, and realizing that everything you do is a decision, and you don't really have to do anything. No one can force you to do anything if you visualize that you have accountability. Which I think to understand what I just said, you probably should read this, you know, because if someone would have said this to me before I read this book, I would probably disagree with them. But that's what my opinion is, and if you disagree with me, then read this. Anyway, it's a very liberating feeling to have accountability for your own life, and it's very, very empowering to kind of internalize that. The next one, I read this. This is the only book that I read this year for the first time. Look at this. It's this is what you can see. I'm not gonna go through all of this, but basically, Soul Without Shame. It's about confronting shame. It's inspired by the teacher of this guy, Byron Brown. I haven't gotten my hands on his teachings yet, but I would like to. He cites him frequently. It's what's his name again? A.H. Almaas from the Diamond Heart book. But this is kind of the same thing. It doesn't go into like esotericism and spirituality that is not accessible for some people. It just kind of helps you to realize stuff about yourself without being all wishy-washy, you know? And shame is something that I myself, I don't want to get too personal, but that's something that I have very much internalized from, you know, things that happened to me throughout my life. And this book not only, well, first of all, this book made me realize it and confront it, and then it also helped me to work out some of it. And it has one chapter that is probably for me quintessential to this book. I think, well, I don't think I can find it immediately, but it's about acceptance. That you, whatever happens to you, should accept it, which is not a positive nor a negative thing. It's just something that helps you deal with your problems, with your trauma, with like stress. I'm not saying that I mastered any of this, you know, I still get stressed out and I still sometimes, you know, feel helpless. But this book, and especially this chapter about acceptance, it also has that same empowering effect as the previous book did. So I think I should stop myself before I talk for way too long. This is probably already long enough. Let's put them back in the original order. I'll show them once more to you. This is kind of me in book form. If you read these books, then you probably have a pretty good idea of who I am. I'm just now thinking of making this into a book tag. I'm not sure yet if I'll like nominate someone or anything, but if you're watching this and you have a channel or if you want to start one, then please also feel called to also show me your favorite books that impacted you. And yeah, that's it. I hope you liked this, and I'll see you next time.